It's September 20th, 2006, and I'm running full speed down Queens Boulevard. I'm running away from my apartment and away from my wife who is chasing after me. And even though I'm dragging the largest piece of luggage known to man, filled to the brim with essentials, I'm running much faster than her. I continue this clip for about 2 more blocks down Queens Boulevard, and then 1 block to the right where I hop in a cab. Now, 3 hours earlier, everything was peaceful. We were sitting in our living room where I was busy downloading our vast CD collection onto my laptop so that I could upload it to my iPod. Remember those things? When she turned to me and asked, "Do you still love me?" "Yes." "Are you still in love with me?" This was a little routine that we had developed during our marriage, but it was rooted in kind of a jab at me. Early in our relationship, I had told her that I loved her, but I was not yet in love with her, that there was a distinction between those two things, which she thought was ridiculous. And thus was born, "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Are you still in love with me?" And I paused. And then I said, "I'm not sure, Igor." Next is a blur of emotions, anger, resentment, sadness, negotiations, all while I'm throwing whatever I can into a ridiculously large suitcase. She says, "You don't have to leave tonight. You can stay on the couch. I won't bother you, and you can leave in the morning." But the conversation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until I'm running full speed down Queens Boulevard, dragging the suitcase along, literally taking the first few steps of my divorce. I used to have anxiety attacks, and now my anxiety really had something to metastasize about as I was going through this process. But I was also worried, even though we lived in New York, that I was going to run into my wife constantly. I would scan the faces of every subway car. I would avoid familiar restaurants. My phone was filling up with voicemails from her, and on my desk at work was a little teddy bear that she had delivered to me holding a heart that said, "I love you." I was worried that if I ran into her, that not only would we get into another conflict, but we might get back together. This wasn't our first separation. The longest one lasted about 5 days, and we always ended up going back. Then she spoke with my friend Sean. I had visited Sean in San Francisco a few months earlier to participate in a comedy festival, and my wife had called her to see if anything came up during that trip that might explain what had happened. And Sean told her about the fact that while I was there, I wanted to get laid by whomever. Now, here's the thing about me. On a good day, I don't have game. And during my trip to San Francisco were not good days. I was a miserable person to be around. I had a less than no game, no chance, no hope, just a want. There was no reason for me to tell it to Sean. There was even less reason for Sean to tell it to my wife. But in retrospect, I'm thankful. I'm grateful she did, because everything changed. No more teddy bear gifts. No more messages on my phone, except from her mother, who was really angry with me and would leave messages like, "What is this I hear about you going to San Francisco and wanting to get a lay?" I was the bad guy now, and she didn't want me back. And so this was the separation that was going to stick. In the midst of all this big change, I decided I'm going to move to Austin. Right? Because when you have anxiety issues and you're going through a big life change, why not just change everything else too? I was going to leave a well-paying job and leave the only city I've ever lived in for a city I'd been to once, where I had no job prospects lined up, where I was going to have to learn how to drive. But the one time I was here for the improv festival, I just loved it. The vibe was great. The community was great. It was all the things I was missing in New York. So it was like, we're going to do this. And I spoke to someone who happened to be looking for a roommate come that January. I now had a plan and 4 months to kill. I spent 2 weeks on one friend's floor. I spent another 3 weeks on another friend's couch. That friend, for some reason, lived near a parking garage that hosted raves every weekend. An apartment sat for a former student. He had walls of aquariums filled with fish and reptiles that I had to feed regularly, which just made me more anxious. And then it was back to the original friend for another 2 weeks. During this time, I also have to get my stuff out of the apartment. I rented a truck and got some of my closest friends together, but got the date wrong. And so when my wife, who wasn't supposed to be there, greeted us at the door, she defiantly turned us away. And I had to return the next week with a different truck and a smaller group of friends, so I could take all my stuff and put it in a storage unit that my father was paying for, while an arbitrator that my father was also paying for drew up divorce papers. Life was chaos, and so I needed something to fixate on. Now, the Austin Improvisers had a message board that I went all in on, so I could look forward to something, but also busy up my brain. And somebody initiated a CD mix exchange, all right? Like mixtapes, but CDs, and distributed to multiple people. I don't know if you've ever put together a mixtape or a playlist for someone, but it takes a considerable amount of thought to do it right, to curate the right songs, put them in the right order, and by do it right, I mean to look cool. And I very much needed to look cool. But people were posting some of the songs that they were going to use, and I couldn't even tell which was the song name and which was the band name. I was clearly not cool, and I started going down a spiral over my song list. I decided I need to listen to more music. And so I subscribed to Pandora and started all sorts of channels. I was downloading from Napster on the daily. Yes. I would write down lyrics that I heard in TV shows and in movies so I could Google them later. My desk at work was covered with Post-its with little song snippets on them, right? Because at the time I had this apartment sitting gig for a friend for a month and a half. Great. No more couch hopping, right? But it was the barest of possible apartment. Nothing on the walls, no radio. The only TV was turned into a geranium. It was just me and my laptop and the mental break I was having. Meanwhile, I get an email from a friend of mine in Toronto that simply says, "Have you seen this?" with a link. It's a link to a blog that my wife had started writing about it. Though she said it's not about me. Though it's called Trying to Get Over You Asshole.blogspot.com. It still exists. And she says that it's anonymous, but she sent the link to all my friends. It featured all sorts of photos from our wedding with our faces obscured. Mine was covered with crying baby heads and braying donkeys. There was also a story that she made up about me crawling into our neighbors' yards and fucking their dogs. And I thought, what if the playlist had a theme? Because if there's a theme, you can come across as looking cool or confuse people and they don't know whether you're cool or not. And I fixated on one particular song that I was going to use, Beyond Belief by Elvis Costello, which has this great line of, "Looking through a looking glass, you see your Alice." And I thought, oh, wow, I was an English major, not a graduate, but for 5 years I majored. I could do a theme of literary references, but every song was too obvious or not fun enough. So that theme dissipated and was replaced by funny songs, and then was replaced by portrait songs, and then songs about the 7 deadly sins, because I figured Joe Jackson knows something about envy. And theme after theme after theme. I needed something to focus on through all of this. But before long, I found myself in Austin. So January 19th, 2007. It's been my first day in Austin. However, my first night, I started having recurring nightmares that I would wake up and my wife would be lying next to me. And I would be cursing myself out. How could you let this happen again? And then I would wake up again, but I wasn't sure that I had fully woken up. Even though I was looking at the walls of my bedroom, painted in an optimistic yellow that I got to choose, it still took me a while. A few days later, all of us in the CD Mix Exchange are gathering, distributing our CDs, which I titled mine Asaf's Mix of Extended Metaphors, Conceits, and Premises. It featured the Elvis Costello song, several songs from my college days, some songs that I'd only started hearing a month ago, one of which I didn't realize was an Austin band because I'm not Polish. There was one song from some friends of mine who were in a band that might have been cheating. I don't know. But there were also a few songs that I only knew about because of my ex-wife. Because when it came to music, she was just always cooler than I was.